Excellent. Hi everyone, and welcome to our section on operational resilience. As Rob mentioned, my name's Luke Coley, Regional Director for Dataminr. For those that may not be familiar with the work that we do with mining and resource organisations, we really help them identify external risks, threats and safety events, and we make that information available at a domestic and global level so that they can prepare for a crisis and maintain business continuity. We do that globally and domestically, as I mentioned, covering all types of topics from geopolitical, security events, natural disasters, and the list goes on. So in the climate that we operate today, there's been a lot of adoption. And I'm joined here today with Grant Chisnall, CEO and founder of Left of Boom. As the title of his business might indicate, it's everything before things go boom. So we'll talk a little bit today around some of the strategies that we're seeing jointly in market. But before I do, I might pass over to Grant to give a little bit of information and insight into Left of Boom's approach.
Thanks very much, Luke, and thanks, ladies and gents, for coming on this afternoon. It's very topical given the situation we're seeing in the market at the moment, and it's a real confluence between the issues that exist within the mining industry, the communities in which you're operating in, and that fundamental challenge to license to operate, which underpins then everything that you're doing around the risk, preparedness, resilience, and preventative suicide defence. So ideally, we want to be working Left of Boom to help preempt or prepare for these situations. But more and more, we're actually getting called in right of boom. And over the years, particularly within the mining industry, it's been, unfortunately, a rich source of issues. It's been an unfortunate rich source of incidents. And we've been involved in things ranging from the Sundance air crash over in the Congo, where 11 people lost their lives, to mining fatalities, to natural disasters, and even cyber events that are targeting organisations now and over the last few years. So we're very proud of the work that we do within the mining industry in particular, but hopefully our aim is to really keep you out of that spotlight through having the proactive strategies in place.
Excellent. Thanks, Grant. And I think where we've aligned and seen those mutual customers in the mining sector has been how do we connect those risks, crisis response to overall goals and objectives of the business. Certainly we've seen quite frequently now is an increase post-COVID because no one saw that coming. Cyber's always on, geopolitical, supply chain, the list goes on. So I think there's an acute awareness now around that. But where are you kind of seeing, particularly in crisis, that more connectivity to business objectives, shareholder values, those sorts of things?
Activism has been a big part of the industry now for a very long time, and we've been part of either strategies have been responding to things like the Haypoint coal terminal lock-offs.
Yep.
I think back in 2011, Camden gas issues the last few, going back about 8 years now, I think it was when they're looking at the initial gas project. So there's nothing really new around that activism and that sort of issue, but what we're seeing is that the shareholder activism has actually really picked up even further. If you look at the responses to things like Juukan Gorge and the incident that happened there with the approved blast of a mine, but the impact that that had on shareholder and particularly shareholder confidence within that industry, that's starting to really, I think, be that real flag in the sand now that we're seeing, or that line in the sand that we're seeing around the confluence between issues and activism and people wanting to do the right thing within the communities and really holding organisations to account.
Yep.
It's nothing really new, I'm afraid, but it's playing out in much different ways now from what we've seen previously. You could get away with a lot more before, you clearly can't now.
Yeah, I think there's certainly the transition going on with ESG as well. There's more voices out there. We've seen a little bit of activity today, but there seems to be a more targeted approach, and certainly for the listed mining and resource organisations, they are coming to groups like yourselves and us to really mitigate and have full context around any risk, because $1 off share price is potentially $1 billion off market cap. We've seen that very actively with cyber, but also around the reputational side as well. So
yeah, and I think again with the emerging markets that a lot of the miners have been operating or moving into, and again nothing really new for the last sort of 15, 20 years, but the expectation has changed. There's rulings around Modern Slavery Act now that requires organisations to demonstrate the fact that they are not participating in that type of economic environment. We've seen again the other big incidents where environmental incidents have played out because of the proliferation of social media and other technology platforms in our hands, the immediacy of information now around any of these incidents is more and more prevalent than before. And that's where I think these sort of solutions that you offer really do tie in nicely to give that awareness, make sure you're monitoring the horizon to see what those issues are, and you're able to respond. Because once we're called in, or if you're called in for a response, you're in reactive mode. You've got to try and get ahead of the situation as much as you can. If you don't have good information or good intelligence to inform that, then you're really on a hiding to nothing from the start.
And are you seeing the increase in security, safety, risk teams becoming more adoptive of information, intelligence, systems, because they've got a bit of scale to cover as well in terms of headquarters here, operations in very remote and volatile areas? Is that a trend you're starting to really come across now?
Yeah, there's, again, we're seeing that sort of movement out to in developing countries over the last 10, 15 years, but everyone now is geographically dispersed. Everyone had to work remotely at some stage over the last few years for the obvious reasons. I've never seen a single executive team in any crisis we've been involved in where they've all been in the same room together. And so the reliance then on that awareness around the outside and the ability to reach out, again, proactively and quickly, that speed of response is often the most crucial issue that we're finding with organisations now. And you're seeing it even now with the recent cyber events with Optus and Medibank and their responses and how quick they are, or how critical people have been of how slow they've been in some of their responses. But funny, for this event here, we've been supporting IMARC directly as well. So in the lead up to the event, we did the preparatory work with the teams, we integrated the security teams with the police and emergency services, did all the preparatory exercising and training around what's going to happen around different types of events if it happens whilst we're here. But now, whilst they're active and live in the event now, while we're in here in our little bubble, that's what they want to create for you, is this bubble of safety where we can operate effectively, do our business that we want to do safely, knowing that we don't have to worry about what's on the outside, but that's always on. And you want that always on, you want that visibility and awareness so that in and out of that safe environment, everyone knows what they need to do.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting you mentioned IMARC. We're sort of showcasing some of that real-time information coming in to protect everyone here in our business as well. So you can sort of see some really live illustrative examples around that, which is great. But coming back to some of those shifts, I think what we're seeing around that adoption of information into intelligence is not only protection of brand, reputation, high value assets, people, but now they're becoming a strategic function. So where there's M&A or investor activity, a lot of the teams and functions within mining organisations and resourcing are using a data-driven approach to really perform precursor risk assessments, security assessments, and really start to inform some of that leadership. So part of what I was going to mention earlier is there's a lot of information out there that exists, but I think it's the way it's organised and deliberately applied to companies around your particular mining assets, people and the like. So it's pretty interesting. You mentioned before, unfortunately, we're sort of a bit more in the rider boom segment. What are some of the sort of approaches you're seeing around information and intelligence when they are reacting and probably around that decision-making process as well?
A great example, actually, it's not a mining one, but it just came to mind as you said before. Andrew Thorburn was a recent appointment for Essendon Football Club as the CEO. A simple Google search would have found his affiliations and his religious beliefs, and I'm not going to criticise the person's beliefs, but that issue blew up clearly for the club, and then they're in that reactive mode, and the reputational impact that that's had, and then the subsequent impact operationally it has, is apparent whilst they're trying to recruit that new person to fill those roles. And this is happening. These are examples that are happening every day, and quite naturally in the mining environment, we think it's a static environment where we've got a site, we've got a fence around that site, or we've got an operation or a lease that we're working within. There's an exploration tenement we might be operating within, and we think that we're in that sort of bubble, and you want to create that bubble for your employees and staff and contractors. But it's that interaction coming in and out, which is where the risks are really often lying, and then the speed of response is the other crucial part. So being able to be aware of potential threats that are coming from an environmental perspective, the natural disaster might be impending, triggering the right sort of level of response so you can actually try and coordinate an area. I mean, we work with one of the companies, De Grey Mining, off the Pilbara, up in the Pilbara at the moment. Great asset, a great resource that they've found, but geographically dispersed teams, big space they're covering, a lot of environmental threats, and their ability to quickly determine the threat and then coordinate their evacuations takes a lot of time. So having good intelligence, not just information, but fused intelligence to inform key decisions around safety, security, evacuation, and other sort of things are really crucial. So it can be more and more crucial now than ever.
Yeah, interesting. And I know some of our, as I said before, our relationship's kind of been organic, where you're doing a lot of the simulation, the strategy, the communication, the culture, and certainly Dataminr has acted as a bit of a vehicle to bring that to life. I'll come to you in a moment, but like we typically see the requirements for mining and resource organisations to do more with technology. So, but in a consolidated fashion. So traditional methods of, jumping on a call, a text brief, providing a short, sharp executive summary, these sorts of things aren't really sufficient enough. No. So certainly we're helping with that facilitation and collaboration in a single sort of capability. But yeah, are you seeing anything where there's sort of an explosion of that happening, or is it still underway in consideration?
Often it's still rely on someone in the chain, punching something in, which takes time.
Yep.
So anything that's going to expedite that, anything that makes sure that the efficiency of the information that's been delivered to you to inform your situational awareness is putting anyone ahead.
Yep.
And the more you can be ahead, the more you can preempt. And the better you can preempt the situation, the better you can be prepared or adapt to it before it even emerges. So that's truly using intelligence in an effective way to adapt to situations before they even happen.
Okay.
I think it's more and more crucial now, as I keep saying, that awareness is there, that situational awareness is better, because the pressure is on individuals.
Yep.
The individual executives, the board members, they need to know yesterday about what's happened and what they're doing in a response, and relying on people in that chain to filter often means that they're not getting the right information they need.
Yeah, okay. And like there's a lot going on in the industry. There's
so much going on.
A lot of shifts. Like in terms of the crisis, do you have any forecasts to a degree around where efforts, resourcing, budget, capability needs to kind of go next? Is there any sort of things that you've seen?
Where it is right now is cyber, and everyone's talking about cyber given what's happened the last few weeks. But what I would say about cyber, and we're involved with the two Toll global cyber attacks, they're a debilitating incident, and there's two broad impacts which are probably less exposed. Which mining's probably less exposed to. So mining doesn't have an immediate consumer base that they're dealing with regularly. So therefore, you don't have that immediacy of loss of income, but you still have an operational impact. You still have a reputational impact. You've still got a requirement to notify and manage breaches if they do occur within your people, your contractors, or other third parties. So your processes now need to be really slick in how you activate, respond, and reassure those stakeholders, because as we saw from the government recently, there's a lot of pressure that comes from them naturally towards independent organisations, more so than what they do for government-owned entities. So that's probably one. Cyber's not going to change, it's not going to go away. And the efforts they've put in there is really to try and make us more resilient for future attacks over the next 5 to 10 years. The biggest issue facing, I think, us as an industry and us as a country, I think, is definitely what's happening with Taiwan. Imagine right now if we had to cut ties with China like we've done with Russia. And so as a supplier to China, as a supplier to their markets, as a supplier of primary resources and materials to them, then that's the looming challenge or the looming threat, I think, that's going to really be the challenge of our times. I think we think, okay, everyone thinks that pandemic was probably the challenge of our lives. I think we've got a bit more to follow yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just following up on that, I think it was Gartner that produced results of the co-branded Deloitte sort of interviews of CEOs across a lot of the publicly listed entities, and geopolitical was actually second.
Yeah.
So I think, again, trying to create that awareness at a global level, but also well, I've got a mine in PNG or I've got one in Latin America. How do I understand that potential instability that may occur there that ultimately leads into operational resilience around safety and security and these sorts of things? So, yeah, again, we're seeing a lot more, I guess, requirements and needs for that because it's a moving target like everything in these high impact events at the moment.
And look, the other thing that's probably more and more prevalent we're seeing now, which again is reflecting in the ESG impact on mining, is that trust in government has dropped, trust in media has dropped, and Edelman do a trust barometer survey, which if you get a chance, get onto it. It's a really good indicator of trust and trends in trust over the years. With those drops, the expectation on industry and organisations has grown. So that means that there's more and more pressure to demonstrate what your values are, demonstrate your alignment with your purpose, and show that in the way that you're engaged within the communities within which you're operating. So those are the three sort of mega trends. I mean, off the back of that, you could talk about the impact on workforce and everything else that's happening. But again, all those sort of things lead to the fact that if you're not really aware of your people, your assets, the safety, the organisational resilience of those aspects you do, then you're going to be exposed again by an incident.
Yep, no, totally agree. And I guess just in terms of like summarising a few takeaways for the audience, starting with the culture around like using information to inform preparedness around incidents, mitigating risks, like what are your sort of, I guess, top tips around that?
Yeah, Simon Sinek loves start with why. The purpose piece is a really important part, and again, if you're true to your purpose and you identify what you need to protect and what values matter most to you, and you're demonstrating that in everything you do. So that then informs what you're doing from a security, from a risk, from a safety, from a crisis response perspective, from any of those sort of risk mitigation steps. Then if you're true to that purpose, then that will come through in your values, your behaviours and your culture. So investing in that, training your people so that they are aware and they're always on and aware of the risks. We often forget about that person in the loop, but then integrating that with your other senses is probably the other thing that we want to make sure is happening out there. So your horizon scans are looking out all the time to understand what things are happening, what things are occurring and what that impact is on you. And then last but not least is just maintaining that or building that trust internally by preparing hard. So if you avoid the outer noise by digging yourself into your hole and thinking it's not going to happen to me, or just waiting for someone else to cop the brunt of it, then unfortunately you'll be caught out yourself. So, and it doesn't matter what part of the life cycle you're at. And people often say, I remember unfortunately one of the words from one of the members of the Sundance crew that were on the board of on the airplane we lost back in that day. I remember them saying, look, we're too small at the moment to really worry about a crisis response. And we've seen the debilitating impact that incident had, not just on the lives of the people that were involved, but then the organisation as a whole didn't survive. So just because you might be smaller doesn't mean you're less of a target now.
Yeah, I think kind of consensus around every organisation is vulnerable given size and maturity and scale. But and I think one of my takeaways is really around the observations we're seeing with our mining and resource customers. There is an enormous proliferation of open source information that can be curated and used for intelligence to mitigate those high impact risks and crises that will ultimately impact brands. So they can be at a very tight level around the assets and the people, or it could be very macro, back to that geopolitical of what's happening with a potential JV or investment. There's a lot of information that exists out there that can be curated and really aligned to the company objectives. Importantly, so teams can make informed decisions. Yeah. So the traditional methods of I might know someone there or I've got a contact in this community there, sufficient for a period, but doesn't give scale and scale is about resilience. So there is a lot of information there, and also surprised by the amount of technology coming into this space to be a vehicle. Heard a gentleman before is like you've got to interpret data and there's all these great dashboards, but you definitely need to execute on it as well.
Oh, look, and that's the difficulty. I think we're as leaders. I think now again, we can feel quite overwhelmed about the amount of information you need to take on, and feel the pressure of a decision. So anything that's going to help that is a bonus, and you want to engage with it as much as you can.
Yep, excellent. Well, thanks for your time,
Thank you.
Grant. We're at C26, so as I said, and Grant will be joining us for a little bit on our booth there. So yeah, if you want to talk through or sort of ask some questions around some of those capabilities and how we can help with operational resilience, we'd love to meet with you. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Luke. Cheers.